Can movies make us healthier? We've been trying to use movies to make us healthier for a long time. One of the first health films that was ever made was called How Diseases Spread, and it was made in 1920 at a time when the public hadn't really grasped the germ theory of disease. So people, by and large, were not exactly sure what caused disease. So this film tried to help people become healthier by helping them avoid infectious disease. So this is what the film did. It told the story of a cab driver who drove a passenger to the train station, and when she got out and paid, she gave him a $1 bill. He stuck it in his mouth, fished around for some change, and then gave her her change, and she went on her way. But if you can see the 2 black stars circled on the $1 bill, those stars were meant to symbolize germs. And what you see in the next slide there is that one of those black stars stayed on his lip. And that told us, the viewers of the film, that this poor guy is now going to get tuberculosis. Okay, so lesson number 1, never put money in your mouth. Okay, so health films were full of such helpful tips, and they mostly conveyed expert advice to the general public in movie theaters, in civic clubs, in church basements, anywhere that movies were shown in this era. But they were also shown a lot in educational settings, including in medical schools. The motion picture was first used in medical education to try to solve the problem of the wet clinic in the surgical amphitheater, which is depicted here in this Thomas Eakins painting, The Agnew Clinic. So in the late 19th and early 20th century, the way that medical students learned how to perform surgeries was that they crammed into these amphitheaters, and they would have to crane their necks to try to see what was going on the operating table below. And these rooms were often poorly lit, and cases were difficult to schedule, and only the students who could be there at that moment could benefit from this experience. And once it was over, they could not review what had just happened, because when it was over, it was over. So it was clear that a better educational system was needed. So by moving from the surgical theater to the movie theater, doctors were then able to capture exemplary performances of surgery and then show them to hundreds or even thousands of students anywhere in the world. And then those students could review what they had seen as many times as they needed to until they learned what they needed to learn. This inspired many doctors to make movies, including, for example, the famous heart surgeon, Dr. Michael DeBakey, who devised an innovative setup. Circled in red, you can see there's he mounted the camera right above the operating table in order to capture the best view of the procedure he was performing. And this setup is actually on display at the DeBakey Museum over at Baylor College of Medicine, which is just down the street. So most of the films that were made by doctors for other doctors, including Dr. DeBakey's, looked like this. This is black and white, so it's not that easy to see for you, but basically it's a close-up of the surgical field. And that's it. But when doctors started making movies to try to help patients, they often enlisted outside help, and that's where things got really interesting. So, in the late 1950s, a doctor by the name of David Rose really wanted to make a movie to teach his patients what to expect with the birth of a new baby. And as luck would have it, he wound up with a patient whose husband was a filmmaker. So this filmmaker and his wife had decided that they wanted to film the birth of their first child. But in 1959, this was no easy feat. For one thing, anyone who could afford to have their baby in a hospital did so. But inside the hospital, apart from doctors, no men were allowed in the labor and delivery rooms. Birth was still considered a taboo subject, and it was really only considered appropriate material for educational films that were made by and for medical professionals. But this doctor was, the filmmaker was persistent, and Dr. Rose really wanted this movie. So together, they persuaded the hospital to let them film in the operating room. And of course, by this time, many doctors had made movies in operating rooms, so that in itself wasn't new. But again, they were medical professionals making technical films for other medical professionals to teach them some procedures, such as delivering a baby. They were not members of the general public filming a live birth to show to the general public. So, not surprisingly, the hospital got a little bit squeamish, and they took back their permission for them to film in the OR. So they had to move the whole operation out of the hospital and into the home. This also posed some problems because This meant that the couple had to both hire the doctor to come to the home, hire a nurse also, and then also rent a bunch of really expensive medical equipment in case anything went wrong. Luckily, nothing did go wrong. The baby was delivered, the birth was filmed, and the doctor got his movie. Almost. So, okay, there were actually some postpartum complications. First one was that when the filmmaker sent his footage to be delivered, to be developed by Kodak, they sent him a letter saying, sign here and we will destroy this footage, or else we will charge you with obscenity and send a policeman to your home. Because in the 1950s, it was actually considered obscene and illegal to film a live childbirth if you were not a doctor. So the filmmaker actually had to get a doctor's note explaining the situation, and when he did, and he delivered that to Kodak, they relented, they processed the film, and they sent it back to him. But this really tells you something important about who controlled medical knowledge at this time. So the second postpartum complication actually came from the movie itself. Now, Dr. Rose did not exactly get the kind of expert advice to patients, educational film that he was hoping for. And to show you what I mean, I first want to show you an example of a typical childbirth film from this era. I'm just going to show you a few stills from it so that you get a sense of what he was probably expecting. So this is a film called Labor and Childbirth. It was made in 1950. And in this film, this is what happens when you have a baby. So you go into labor, you call the doctor, say, I'm going to have a baby. The doctor answers his own phone, first of all, and says, okay, I'll meet you at the hospital. This is important. You put on your lipstick, right? Okay. Very important to note that. Then when you get to the hospital, you lay down, you relax, you do some knitting. And then, I love this, a nurse comes and delivers what they call in the movie helpful medicines. I don't know what that means. And then you lay down to really have your baby. The doctor gets into the catcher's position. And then the next thing you know, you're in your room, you have a shiny robe on, you have a happy, healthy baby, and only then does the father actually enter the scene. So that's what it looks like when you have a baby. But that is not the kind of movie that Dr. Rose got. Instead, he got something that looked like this. It's a film called Window Water Baby Moving, and it is now considered an absolute masterpiece of experimental art cinema. It was made by the filmmaker Stan Brakhage, who was really one of the most important filmmakers of the 20th century. As you can see, it's full of abstract, poetic, rapidly edited, and graphically quite beautiful, but narratively somewhat incoherent sequences. They definitely captured a certain sense of what childbirth is all about, but not in any really clear-cut, instructional way. Now, at this moment in the film, the father and filmmaker appears on screen. So this is Stan Brakhage, and I love this. What he has told, what happened after the fact, is that he just got so overcome with emotion that he couldn't even handle the camera anymore. He couldn't keep filming. So his wife, Jane, who had just delivered a baby, said, give me the camera. So he did, and so she captured this great shot of him, as well as some of the tenderest moments of the entire film as she brings the baby to her breast. So what can we learn from Window Water Baby Moving about how movies can make us healthier today? I think the first lesson is that what doctors want to tell patients is not always what patients need to hear. Stan Brakhage did not deliver the kind of movie that Dr. Rose wanted. Instead, he delivered the patient's experience, shot from the father's and mother's point of view. I think the second important lesson is that when patients tell their stories in collaboration with their doctors, they can produce something that is much, much more powerful than a traditional medical narrative ever could be. Incredibly, this film was actually used as a teaching tool. It was shown in nursing schools and to train midwives for many years. But in order for those audiences to learn from this film, they really had to adopt the patient's perspective and experience all of the chaos and beauty that would otherwise be represented as a very medicalized procedure. So I think the final important lesson that we can take from window water baby moving is that participatory media can be much more powerful than expert-controlled media. And the same is true for participatory medicine. We live in the age of YouTube, where everyone is a filmmaker and everyone has a story to tell. We need to help doctors and patients tell their stories together to help heal medicine. And to do that, we need to help them cultivate the skills that they need to use the digital media tools that are at their disposal today. We need to help them develop digital health literacies. Because at the end of the day, most medical problems are really communication problems. And anyone with a smartphone, which is over half of all American adults today, and it seems everyone in this room, has more powerful communication tools in their pockets than we've ever had before. We need to use them to help bring back the humanity in medicine. Thank you.